Good afternoon, and welcome to the April 2016 edition of the Sustainable Materials Management Web Academy. We are happy to have you participating. This 90-minute webinar is hosted by the Environmental Protection Agency to provide training and networking opportunities to state and local governments, non-governmental organizations, and other interested stakeholders in sustainable materials management. Survey question. Today, we're going to try something new to get a sense of our audience. George is pulling up our polling question, and we would be very pleased if you would reply. We'd like to get an idea of the makeup of our audience today. As George mentioned, today's topic is how communities can transform waste streams through policies and programs. This webinar will showcase an EPA tool for local governments to move their communities towards higher levels of waste reduction, materials reuse, recycling, and composting across waste generation sectors. We will also hear from the city of Fort Collins, Colorado, a community that is charting a path towards zero waste, having successfully implemented several policies and programs featured in our tool. Fort Collins' journey to zero waste began with setting a goal of achieving 50% diversion from landfill and has progressed over time through a series of adopted ordinances. George will let us see our polling results today. Can I see them? Nope. I see the slide. So
results?
Yeah.
Okay, the results are 69% from local, state, federal government, 18% private sector, business, institution, or consultant, 9% nonprofit organization, 3% academia, and 2% other.
Great. So that's kind of a fun thing for us. So thank you so much for your participation in our poll. So today, we are going to feature a panel of 2 speakers. After each speaker, we will pause and answer 1 or 2 burning questions, so please type your questions into the chat box as we move forward. So moving into today's webinar, please note our disclaimer slide, George. Our disclaimer slide, sorry we're having a little technical difficulties today. Our disclaimer slide is up. Well, trust me, there is a disclaimer slide, and it's in the chat box, and we'll have it posted online. So let's move into the webinar. I would like to introduce Karen Irwin, Sustainable Local Government Lead for EPA Region 9, our California office, and my colleague. Her current position involves partnering with local governments and other entities to advance sustainable objectives in the area of sustainable materials management and zero waste, renewable energy, green streets, and landscaping. Karen served as a project manager for the development of the Managing and Transforming Waste Stream tool.
Karen, I gave you controls.
Okay, so everybody can see my screen, or?
I cannot see your screen.
Yeah, okay. Let me try this again.
Hold on, let's change it. I'll see if I can change it to you, Karen.
I made her.
Oh, here we go.
Great. If you would do your full screen, Karen, that would be awesome. Perfect.
Perfect. Okay, now let me, all right. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so I think we're set now. So thank you so much, Chris, for the great introduction. And I'm excited to talk about a tool that's been published now for a few months on EPA's website. And it was developed for EPA under contract by a team of zero waste and solid waste consultants with ongoing contributions by EPA. So what is it? In a nutshell, it's an interactive table of 100 policy and program strategies that communities can consider to move towards higher levels of diversion from landfill or to move towards zero waste. And it comes with a library of successful programs that have been implemented by cities and counties across the country, including some examples from nonprofit organizations. So how might local governments and others use this tool? We think to come up with strategies for a local solid waste plan that's being updated, or for a new zero waste plan, or to scope out options for new community-based initiatives. And this tool has a zero waste leaning, but I wanted to mention that there's content in it that would be useful for any community, irrespective of whether your community has set a zero waste goal or how low or how high its current rate of diversion is from landfill. So first, looking at the big picture, there are about 254 million tons of municipal solid waste generated annually in the U.S., and only about a third of this is recycled on a national average. And about twice as much construction and demolition debris is generated. While we don't have a national figure on how much C&D debris is generated, we do know that a considerable amount is concrete, and that much of that is recycled. But I also note that municipalities typically focus on municipal solid waste, and there's a lot of C&D debris out there contributing to the overall tonnage that's generated in communities. And some cities and counties have achieved high diversion rates, including for both MSW and C&D, showing what's possible. So this pie chart shows a different way of accounting for greenhouse gases using a systems-based view to look at what we use energy for. And the greenhouse gas emissions for the two slices of pie related to providing goods and providing food are pretty significant. Combined, they are 42% of the total. And the bulk of these emissions are from upstream extraction of materials and processing of goods and food. So to the extent that local agency programs can influence the waste reduction, materials reuse, as well as recycling, this lowers the need for extracting virgin materials and the resulting greenhouse gases. EPA's Sustainable Materials Management Initiative addresses the full life cycle footprint of materials, and it encourages a shift in focus from just the end-of-life recovery to reducing and reusing. And so one of the visions for the Managing and Transforming Waste Streams tool that I'm going to talk more about in a moment is to illustrate the many ways that local governments can take actions to promote waste reduction and materials reuse. Looking at just the recycling we're already doing nationally, it's having a large positive effect on lowering greenhouse gases. If you look at this graph here, in 2013, about 87 million tons of MSW was recycled, and this is equivalent in carbon dioxide emissions to removing 39 million passenger vehicles from the road. So this should give you a sense of the tremendous potential that changing the way materials are managed can have on reducing greenhouse gases. It's worth mentioning that food is the single largest category of what's discarded as MSW. And food production consumes a lot of water and energy and creates methane, a potent greenhouse gas, when it's landfilled. And only 5% of food waste is now being composted or otherwise recovered. And so there's quite a bit of room here for improvement. And EPA has set a new national goal to reduce food waste by 50% by 2030. So moving into the Managing and Transforming Waste Streams tool, this looks primarily at what local governments can do to address different waste streams, whether it's residential, commercial, C&D. The general idea is to call out what other communities have successfully implemented in the form of ordinances, resolutions, policies, incentives, and outreach, and make it widely accessible. I should also mention that it captures some efforts that can be led by nonprofit organizations or forward-thinking businesses. And the tool has interactive features that you can use to tailor it to the list of strategies that you would like to prioritize, and easily copy and paste this into a planning document. And I'll be demonstrating, giving you a live demo of how to use the tool later. So you might start with 100 measures, but end up with a top 10 of interest for near-term scoping, and maybe another set of measures for looking at over a longer time frame. The tool features over 250 implementation examples from communities of all sizes across the U.S., spanning urban, suburban, and rural communities. We looked for implementation examples that represent good models, and we posted web links to the city and county ordinance language and program websites. And each of the 100 strategies in the tool comes with anywhere from 1 to 5 implementation examples from communities, and we continue to add more over time as we get suggestions. There are detailed case studies for how municipal franchise agreements or contracts with haulers can be amended so that you can require or incentivize recycling and composting. And there are many resource web links for additional information, including outreach materials that cities and counties have developed and that can be used and tailored by other communities. I think this tool will be useful to local and tribal solid waste and recycling program managers, Regional planning agencies might use the tool if they're working with a group of communities and they'd like to add new strategies into a regional solid waste plan, as well as states and nonprofit organizations and other interested parties that interact with local governments. They might find a lot of content in this tool useful. So just wanted to give you a basic snapshot of the 100 policy and program strategies table. Underneath each policy or program description is a link routing directly to examples and resources for that specific strategy. And in the middle, there's a sector column and a material or product group column. And the last 6 columns on the right are qualitative rankings for various factors, which I will talk about on the next slide. There are a number of ways to customize the list of 100 strategies. You can search by sector or material. You can hide measures that a local government has already implemented. You can filter the strategies by qualitative rankings for diversion potential, upstream climate impact reduction, as well as for implementation factors. And these get at things like some policies and programs require control by the local government over the discard management system in order to accomplish, while others less so. Some are more conducive to being initiated or being led by a community group other than the local government. And so we give a filter rank. The filters are ranked high, medium, or low, or easy, medium, or difficult. And these are intended to serve as general rules of thumb based on the field experience of the consultant team that helped develop this tool. And I'll give you some examples later in the presentation. So what's included in the tool? We have a quick reference guide posted on the main web page that gives you a preview of all the content. And it falls under one or more of these, or actually one of these 9 action statements. So some of them apply to 2 or 3 of these. So whether it's adopting goals and plans, expanding curbside collection, addressing C&D, assistance to businesses, outreach and education, and so forth. So if you want to focus on one of these in particular, I encourage you to pull up the quick reference guide and look up which strategies specifically fall under it so you can more easily find them in the tool. Here are a couple of snapshots from the implementation examples and resources. So these are able to capture more detailed nuances about the policies and programs that the communities have implemented. So on the left, lead by example road construction shows 4 examples of cities that have incorporated different types of reusable and recyclable materials into their road construction projects. And on the right, reuse depot good banks. So likewise, there are different examples from communities, whether it's a reuse facility that accepts donations of used clothing, or donations from local businesses of furniture, a facility that loans out work tools to volunteer organizations. There's a lot of different models that can be captured in this part of the tool. And the intent of these is not to give you, full-fledged case studies, but more just a place to start, and some web links and just a short description of the policy or program, with the idea that you can follow up directly with these communities to get more details on their programs that might be important to your community. There are some underlying themes in the tool that you may pick up on when using. The first being addressing all sectors of waste generators. This is an important shift for local agencies to look beyond what they might traditionally have authority to manage and to take actions to influence other waste streams in the community. Also, calling attention to ways that local governments can support source reduction and reuse for materials. There are about 30 strategies in the tool that addresses reduction or reuse. More material types, looking at options for how to get to those hard to recycle materials, large bulky items, textiles, electronics. The tool also illustrates there are a variety of approaches that local governments can take, certainly not a one-size-fits-all, and they're not placed in any particular order. But you'll also note that the strategies that involve setting some form of requirement, this could be a required rate structure that incentivizes recycling or a requirement in an ordinance for recycling. These are generally going to be ranked higher on diversion potential relative to voluntary approaches. And finally, phasing. You'll notice an element of phasing in the strategies over time, for example. So there are 3 options in the tool related to local government agency procurement. There's voluntary green procurement. There's making green procurement mandatory across departments. And there's zero waste procurement, in which the local agency is going that extra step to only purchase products that meet strict design standards and that generate minimal waste. So there's a spreadsheet version available online, and we know that some users like to manipulate the tables like this. They might want to add or remove columns, so we wanted to make this available. And the spreadsheet also has columns on the far right noting what type of action each of these measures relates to, whether it's requirement, incentive, or whether it has to do with reduction, reuse, or recovery, and so forth. I'd also like to briefly mention a related tool that will be soon available. This is a new EPA calculator, and it's designed to help communities make the connection between their local solid waste plans and local energy and climate action plans. So the calculator expands upon EPA's waste reduction model, or WARM version 14, and it places the WARM emission factors directly in the context of a community's waste stream and its options for policy and programs that it could implement. And the idea is to use the calculator to quantify the potential greenhouse gas benefit over a longer planning time frame, up to 10 years, and to be able to compare the greenhouse gas reductions from different policies and programs that a community can implement. And a link to the calculator will be posted on the Managing and Transforming Waste Streams website, so I encourage you to stay tuned for that. So in looking beyond what some communities have accomplished and how they've accomplished it, I'd like to review a few case studies for food waste initiatives that are drawn from examples included in the tool, and look specifically at what factors came together in the community to make it successful, what may have driven adoption of this new initiative. So starting with Lafayette, Colorado, a suburban community. So in 2015, the city expanded residential collection to include food and yard waste. And this is an area that historically has low solid waste tipping fees. And so what really seemed to make the difference here is that there was an informed nonprofit organization that provided leadership, and they supported a group of residents that really got behind this effort. So the NPO conducted a waste audit showing 40% of what's thrown away is compostable. It builds upon an existing pay-as-you-throw rate structure. He was able to incorporate the new green bin service in a way that really incentivized residents to shift to the smallest size trash bin. So it's the difference between paying $17 a month versus $30 a month. So all of this added up to a successful program effort. Hamilton, Massachusetts, a small rural suburban community. In 2012, the town began collecting food and yard waste weekly, and they switched to every other week trash collection, and they did this in 2 pilot phases. What stood out about the case study for this is that the town successfully negotiated with a local farm to process the compostables, as well as its local hauler to collect the compostables and deliver them to the farm. In this case, there were also some town volunteers that were supportive and helping out. And it also helps that this program saves the town money because the tipping fee for organics is less than the tipping fee for trash. This is a voluntary program, and half of the residents are participating. And it's resulted in a 32% decrease in solid waste going to landfill, so successful in this small rural community. In Boulder, there's a food rescue organization, Boulder Food Rescue, that picks up perishable food and delivers it the same day to food insecure people at various locations in the community. And what struck me about this example is it stemmed from a university research project. So it grew from 5 student founders into a nonprofit organization that has hundreds of volunteers. And this model has been replicated in various communities. And I wanted to mention it as just something that illustrates how innovation can start anywhere in a community, and this is certainly a model that can be replicated anywhere. And finally, Portland's Fork It Over. This is a larger scale example of something very similar where it is linking businesses with food rescue agencies. And in this case, a regional government funded this initiative using community-based social marketing. It conducted surveys to identify barriers and helped equip the food rescue agencies. And it also recruited industry spokespersons and worked with asking businesses to make a public commitment. So I think the research and approach that was applied here can serve as a really good model for other areas on how to overcome some of the common barriers that you might find and to pursue commitments from businesses. So in looking across all of these 4 case studies, they're different in scope, but what they all seem to have in common is a group of people in the community that came together to support it. And now I'm going to switch to the online tool so that you can get a live demo, see how this works. Note that there's a brief video tutorial, less than 5 minutes, that's available, and you can listen to that anytime. So here are the various columns, and sector is here. So if you hover your cursor over this, you'll see the different terms used in the table. ICI refers to institutional, commercial, and industrial, and the same hover for material or product group. And there's links to examples and resources for each of these. I can also hide any measure, let's say that a community may have already implemented. I can highlight other measures of interest. And also, I'll give you an example of how these different filters work. So under diversion potential, if I really only want to see the measures that are ranked high for diversion potential, I go here. And sorry about this, I need to figure out how to scroll. Here we go. Okay, so this shows me that there are 22 out of the total 100 entries that are ranked high for diversion potential. And to go back to the default, I just have to select all again. And if I want to look at upstream impacts, and again, this relates to how significantly the measure can reduce the impacts, greenhouse gas impacts from the upstream, I can select medium or high. And that's going to show me all the measures that are ranked either medium or high for diversion potential, or sorry, for upstream impacts. Now I also can use this reset to default view to go back to the default view of the table and start over. Here are some of the other things in the tool. Local authority, how much control must the local government have over the discard management system, high, low, or medium. Again, these are all qualitative rankings based on the field experience of the consultant team that helped put this tool together. Receptivity, how relatively easy or difficult is it to get buy-in. Staff knowledge, do you need a more significant amount of expertise among staff to accomplish it or not? Community-led initiatives, how easy or hard is it for a nonprofit organization to lead or initiate the measure? So now I'm going to move into some hypothetical uses of the table. So I have 4 examples. And I'm going to start with a local government agency that just wants to look at what it can do with its government operation. So I go to the sector column and type in GOV. And by scrolling down, this shows me that I have 8 entries out of the 100 that relate to lead by example kinds of measures. So let's say I highlight the zero waste public venues and events. And I can click on examples and ordinances, and this will pull me right to examples from various communities that have done really good things with zero waste events, as well as resources. And there's also in the tool a separate measure for how local governments can promote zero waste at private events and venues. So I encourage you to look across the tool to find these different opportunities. So now I'm going to reset the table back to the default view and go through a hypothetical example in which a local agency wants to evaluate ways to increase the amount of recyclables and compostables being collected from residents or businesses. So I'm going to use the sector column again and type in RES to pull up the measures related to residences. And you'll see that a lot of these policies or programs relate to different ways that local governments can set requirements. So you can set requirements on residents or businesses to let's say, set out recycling bins, or require that business owners give access to employees for recycling. You can require that businesses source separate recyclables from the trash, or the requirement can be set on waste haulers. Let's say require that they be licensed, number 28, licensing with reporting. And you can pair this with other requirements, such as provide recycling service to any customers that request it. These requirements are typically done by ordinance, so a franchise agreement with a hauler is not a prerequisite to implementing many of these things. Let's see, under 30, source separation incentives, you can incentivize, do different ways. Again, I can click on, show you some of the different ways that communities have done very innovative things for source separation, including, we have a rural example down here. Going back to the tool, there are a number of measures for municipalities that are in charge of collection, either by themselves or through a contractor. So there are options for expanding this collection to different types of materials or different kinds of properties, such as multifamily homes. And there are ways to reward haulers for recycling. So we have that under service provider rewards. And we also have service provider contract and franchise agreements. We have a lot of content under here. So I'm going to take you to some of the examples we have here. So these are just the 5 examples that we have. But if you click on resources, you'll see we have a lot of different content on this. So this just shows many different ways that you can look at the best practices for contracting. And if I click on one of these, it'll pull up a number of kind of pros and cons and different case studies. So you can click on a case study, and this is part of the tool that has more full-blown information on this. So let's say I go back to the tool, and I'm looking at this list. There are a number of measures. Let's say I want to pare this down to those that don't require that I have a lot of staff knowledge. So I'm going to select medium or low. Which one of these are a little bit easier? And again, I scroll down, 23 entries out of the 100 that I can look at now. So I'm going to go on to my third hypothetical example, reset the default view. And let's say I really only want to focus on organics measures. I'm doing a lot with other things, but could use more on organics. So I type in the material or product group column and start scrolling down to see what's in here. And I wanted to point out that we have several measures that are specific to food waste. And these are distinguished from one another depending on what's involved. Is the food being donated to alleviate hunger? Is it being collected for composting? Does it involve curbside collection or setting up drop-off locations in the community? Does it involve doing outreach or compost processing or anaerobic digestion facilities? So lots of options and good content for you to look at there. So I'm going to move on to my final hypothetical scenario. So let's say I am a nonprofit organization and I'm interested in strategies that target the general public and can be led by a community group. Now I have a couple options. I could either search for under community. I could type that in here for just the community measures, or I could go over here to the final filter and I could just see which ones are listed as medium or easy. And I can get a whole slew of measures this way as well. Wanted to show you a few things in here. Materials exchange, reuse promotions, reuse business network. So this just gives you a flavor for a lot of the different reuse options that nonprofits can encourage. And if I keep scrolling down, we have some outreach related things here, for example, social marketing. So if I click on this, this will take me to 4 different examples of social marketing initiatives undertaken by cities and counties. And if you are interested in social marketing, some resources for you to consider. So that pretty much concludes my online demonstration. And I'm going to return to my slides so I can pull up the last one, and you'll be able to see my contact information.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. Karen, in the interest of time, I think I'm going to skip our second polling question and go right to the questions that the audience have asked of you. One right off, I think a lot of folks are interested in the organics content of the tool. And just since you were right there, one specific question was talking about upstream activities. And I know that you have examples of that in the tool. So can you just talk a little bit about some of the source reduction angle of the tool?
Yeah, so in fact, if I, why don't we just quickly go back to the tool, and then I can pull up that particular, let's see, here is, So if we click on high for upstream impacts, and let's see what happens if I search for organics. So this is maybe that, oh, there's not too many. That's what we see. I don't have any matching records, so I guess the measures that we're looking at are not so much on the organic side, are not so much going to get at the upstream. There is maybe one exception I should mention is backyard neighborhood composting. We do consider this a source reduction activity. Maybe I'll just go to some of these right now and typing in organic so we can see the list again. So yeah, so I think most of these are probably at least not ranked in the tool for having necessarily an upstream impact. But clearly, anytime you reduce food waste, and I think we have some good examples under food waste outreach and prevention, and food waste. So whether it's for vendors, we have some vendors here, or whether it's for consumers, there's a lot of opportunities for local governments to spread the word on food waste outreach and prevention, as well as donation.
Great. That was a particular interest of many on the phone. The other question I have, and I think it's an excellent question, whoever brought it up, thank you so much, is how is this tool going to be monitored and updated? And really, we're looking for everyone to do that with us. Karen can do it physically, but we're always looking for good examples and opportunities to include more information in the tool. So Karen, you want to talk a little bit more to that?
Yes, absolutely. So we have, as you can see, we have a lot of great resources. We have some great examples in the tool already that I think people will really benefit from. But as we do want to update it, people are doing great stuff all the time. And so as soon as we learn about these things, we can certainly add them into the tool where they fit. This is a perfect way to share some really successful examples that are out there by cities and communities, or cities and counties. So definitely get in touch with me, and I'd be happy to consider adding a success story that you have into the tool.
Great. So that was a little marketing plug on our end, so thank you all in the audience. If you have any great stories to share, please forward them to Karen. So with that, I think we're going to change over to our second presentation, which gets a little bit more specific into work that is being done in Colorado. I would like to introduce Caroline Mitchell, who's an environmental planner for the city of Fort Collins, Colorado. She's in charge of the data aspects of waste for Fort Collins and the administration of the community's pay-as-you-throw ordinance. She's currently working on a project called the Community Recycling Ordinance, which would expand Fort Collins pay-as-you-throw ordinance to multifamily and commercial sectors, and in the future starting organics collections from residents and food scraps collections from restaurants and grocers. Additionally, Carolyn's responsible for the Waste Reduction and Recycling Assistance Program, or WRAP, which we've also had a webinar on if you want to check out our website, which helps apartment complexes and businesses start and improve recycling programs. Carolyn, we'll pass the presentation on to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are, everyone. So I would like to start off with just a basic overview of the Fort Collins community. We are around just over 158,000 residents. Fort Collins is a college town. Colorado State University is a really significant aspect of our community. We have a privatized collection system, so the city doesn't provide any of the trash service or recycling service, nor do we contract for it in any of the sectors of the community. So it's an open market for residential, multifamily, and commercial and industrial in Fort Collins. There are 3 primary haulers that operate in town and a number of other roll-off haulers or construction demolition haulers. So the city's primary role in Fort Collins and in trash and waste reduction and recycling is in the policy role. We provide education, data collection, regulation of the haulers by licensing them, as well as providing some infrastructure. Now, since this webinar is focusing on the new planning tool from the EPA, you'll notice on all of my slides I have these little blue circles with numbers in them. And each of those numbers refer back to this particular strategy in the EPA's tool, if you would like to reference back. And I would like to say that Fort Collins policies have really evolved over time. We started off with a couple of really foundational policies that sort of set the groundwork for future development. And one that I would say has been, that I would recommend to any community that is sort of looking for where to start in waste reduction and recycling, would be licensing your haulers. Licensing is a pretty simple step and pretty agreeable in most communities because it allows you to set a minimum framework for safety in the community and making sure all the haulers operating in town have adequate insurance, and some of these just basic necessities. But it also allows your community to require that the haulers provide information about the material that they're collecting. So in Fort Collins, every company that collects trash in the community reports twice a year the amount of material they collect of the different types and also which sector that material was collected from. And there's the old adage that you manage what you measure. And so just starting off with having an ability to measure your materials is really important. Next, the other foundational step that we've taken was just having basic collection requirements from our haulers. So I think the City of Fort Collins started licensing haulers in 1990, and in the early 90s and 92, we also started requiring that haulers provide recycling service in Fort Collins. At that point, it wasn't yet bundled in as a pay-as-you-throw ordinance. We just said that if you provide trash service in Fort Collins, if your customer, whether it's a resident or a business or an apartment complex, wants recycling service, you as a hauler have to provide that service. So those were some of our real foundational starts. I also included single-stream recycling on this slide just to acknowledge that there is single-stream recycling happening in Fort Collins. The city doesn't require single-stream collection. In our current ordinances, we just require that haulers collect the broad spectrum of recyclables that are accepted at the recycling processing facility, but the city doesn't mandate how they're collected. Nonetheless, all the haulers in the community primarily collect using single-stream. So this is just a timeline of some of the big policy changes or big policy adoption in Fort Collins over time to, again, recognize that all of our programs and policies have been incrementally adopted throughout the years. In 1995, we adopted our pay-as-you-throw ordinance, and this timeline is also color coordinated. So you can see in the other blue bubbles, we updated our pay-as-you-throw ordinance multiple times over the years to clarify that homeowners associations did need to be included in the ordinance, and to require that haulers provide carts for that service, and other clarifications and slight expansions as needed. As mentioned in the introduction, Fort Collins is currently working on a project we're calling the Community Recycling Ordinance. And that project, as also was mentioned in the intro, would expand the pay-as-you-throw ordinance by requiring bundling of trash and recycling service for multifamily and commercial sectors in Fort Collins. We're also considering organics collection from multiple sectors of the community, but that project is definitely under development, so we're not sure exactly where everything will land yet. The orange bubbles on this slide are the goals that have been adopted in the community. Those are also a really important tool for us. The initial goal of recycling or composting 50% of our material, or having 50% diversion, was adopted back in 1999. And that also provides a framework for staff to continue to build policies to work towards the goals that have been adopted in the community. So they really provide a really helpful framework for moving forward on policy and projects within a community. You'll see in the green bubbles, we also have adopted landfill bans on a few materials. And I've got some more specifics about these policies in future slides. I also wanted to give a little bit of information about our numbers for anybody who is likes to get into the nitty-gritty of the numbers. So there are multiple pieces of information on this slide. The blue line shows our residential diversion rate. You'll notice it's a little bit higher in 2011. In the funny way the numbers work, we had a big storm that spring that knocked down a whole bunch of branches. So there's a whole bunch of green waste composting and recycling that happened in the single-family sector that year. But otherwise, we have been fairly consistent in the low 30s for both our residential and our commercial diversion. The brown line there is our commercial diversion, and the orange line is our combined municipal solid waste, or the combination of residential and commercial materials. But the other point I really wanted to share from this slide is that Fort Collins started tracking our what we call industrial diversion. And in that category for Fort Collins, we include our scrap metal recycling, concrete, asphalt, biosolids, the organics that are composted by the many breweries in Fort Collins, as well as the waste materials that are generated through the construction and demolition industries, and really any waste that's collected in a roll-off container. And as Karen was mentioning earlier, these sectors beyond the residential and commercial are often not tracked in a community. And in Fort Collins, it turns out that there is a really significant amount of diversion that happens in that sector. And so we do track that, and we track it separately from MSW because, you know, a slight change in these big heavy industrial materials could really mask a change in the MSW materials. But when we combine the industrial and the MSW together, that's where we get what we call our community diversion rate, the red line in the middle. I do include the industrial numbers in our overall community diversion rate, not because we're trying to inflate our numbers, but because we believe that the industrial diversion is also really important in addition to the MSW diversion. So we report a number, a wide variety of numbers to track all the different activity that's happening in the community. Now, this slide breaks down the goals that we've passed a little bit more specifically. As I'd already mentioned, in 1999, Fort Collins passed a 50% diversion rate goal. In 2013, we updated that to a goal with a series of goals, eventually landing on a zero waste goal by 2030. And those were accompanied by a plan that outlined some of the primary steps that would take to accomplish that goal. Last year, the City of Fort Collins also passed very ambitious climate action goals, greenhouse gas reduction goals. And as Karen was mentioning before, the connections between recycling and composting and waste reduction and greenhouse gas reduction are really strong. And those are certainly identified in Fort Collins' climate action plan. A road to zero waste is one of the key components for implementing that climate action plan. In fact, when the city just recently was doing a lot of work on putting together an implementation plan for the climate action plan, implementing the community recycling ordinance, which would be expanding that recycling into the multifamily and commercial sectors, as well as collecting organics from restaurants, grocers, and single-family homes, came in as the third most effective strategy, or the third greatest greenhouse gas reduction strategy in our modeling thus far. So it's a really significant component. I also mentioned that we've passed landfill bans in Fort Collins. In 2007, the city banned the disposal of electronics in the landfill. That was later passed as a statewide ban, so you can no longer dispose of electronics in the landfill anywhere in Colorado. In 2013, the city also banned the landfill disposal of cardboard. And interestingly, this was driven as much by its climate impacts, its greenhouse gas reduction impacts, as it was from the waste reduction benefits. Because like food waste or anything organic, cardboard breaking down in the landfill generates a lot of methane. And it turns out that our community was landfilling a really significant amount of cardboard. And so Fort Collins City Council adopted this landfill ban. We have seen a reduction in, well, an increase in recycling in the single stream in both the commercial and the residential sector, as well as some of the businesses that recycle cardboard separately. We've also seen an increase in cardboard collected at the drop-off centers as a result of that landfill ban. I would say we've definitely identified that this, like many aspects of recycling, require continual education and reinforcement. And we have found that the enforcement from the city role exclusively is challenging in an open market system. The assistance of the haulers that are collecting the material is really important for implementing this landfill ban. Now, just as an overview of the different policies that are highlighted in the EPA tool regarding single family that have been implemented in Fort Collins. As I mentioned before, haulers in Fort Collins that are servicing single family homes have to provide carts for the collection of recyclables. Recycling is bundled in with the trash service for no additional charge. And we also have a pay-as-you-throw pricing system in which the more volume of trash service you subscribe to, the higher your trash bill is. And again, these have been very foundational policies in Fort Collins. So we have an example sit on here just to clarify what I mean by 100% price difference between our sizes of trash carts. If, for example, you subscribe the smallest trash cart from your hauler were $15 a month, the medium-sized trash cart would be $30, and the largest sized trash cart would be $45. Again, the city does not set the rates. Those are set by the haulers. The pay-as-you-throw ordinance just sets the framework through which the haulers set that pricing system. Now, when we look at the comparison in Fort Collins, where currently the single-family homes are provided recycling automatically as part of their trash service, as compared to the multifamily and the commercial sectors where all of our programs are currently voluntary, we see a really significant change or difference in the amount of participation. Again, this information is provided by the private haulers in Fort Collins, but we have shown that in 2014, 95% of the single-family homes in Fort Collins had their recycling bins, as opposed to 68% of multifamily complexes or 48% of businesses that subscribe to recycling. Now, I would like to tell you a little bit about those voluntary programs that we do have for the multifamily and the commercial sectors. As was mentioned in the intro, we have a program called WRAP, which stands for the Waste Reduction and Recycling Assistance Program, not to be confused by the WRAP film plastic recycling program that is put together nationwide. This is just a City of Fort Collins program. And it focuses on all materials, not just plastic film. So we do provide educational materials, including a guidelines poster that we distribute in many different formats for different applications. We have provided rebates. We have a rebate both for the service rebate if you start recycling, and then also for any startup costs, which often for businesses means a rebate for bins that they purchase internally when they start up their recycling programs. It's been very interesting, though, since we started this program in 2012, we found that the rebates have been important as a conversation starter for locations where, for instance, there was an employee interested in recycling but had a hard time getting their manager to pay attention. The rebates often got the attention of somebody who is in a leadership role at the organization who wasn't previously interested in recycling. But the way our rebates are structured, we actually pay them out after the organization has been recycling for 6 months. And of the organizations that have applied for the rebates, there's only been one that has come back and submitted their documentation to get the full rebate without me going back and contacting them. So it seems like the rebate has been very useful in starting conversations, but in the end, I think isn't the primary motivator for continuing the recycling program. We still think it's an effective tool. It's just turned out to apply differently than we expected initially. We also provide free on-site waste assessments where we help the location either identify ways to improve their recycling program or help understand what a recycling program would look like in their facility. And also we really focus on opportunities where the location could potentially save money, especially by decreasing their trash service, either because they're already oversubscribed to trash service or because they would be starting recycling and they therefore wouldn't need as much trash capacity. The City of Fort Collins also has a noteworthy program called ClimateWise that works with the business sector. It's also voluntary. There are about 370 businesses that participate, including the majority of the largest businesses in Fort Collins. This ClimateWise program provides assistance and recognition in the areas of waste, energy, transportation, and water. They have some very impressive statistics. Since its inception in the year 2000, The program has saved its participants more than $92 million, and it's reduced 1.3 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Now, here's a copy of that guidelines poster that I mentioned earlier. This has been a really important education piece for us to share with our residents as well as the businesses and apartment complexes. We have it available as a paper poster, but we've also made it into a metal sign through our signs department, just like you see a street sign outside. And that has allowed us to install these in outdoor enclosures and loading docks and locations where otherwise the materials would sort of fall apart, which both helps identify where the recycling bin is as compared to the trash, and helps clarify at the point of disposal which materials should be going in which bin. We've also had this printed up as a decal that has been put on bins and dumpsters. You know, it's a pretty fundamental step, but that basic step of making sure people know which bin is for recycling and which bin for trash is a surprisingly common challenge and a really important detail to get straight. We do also share this guidelines graphic with the haulers that operate in our community and our regional partners. It's always a challenge to get consistent communications, but that's a real benefit for residents in the area. So we do our best to facilitate that. We do also have a recycling directory on our website for materials that we know of that can be reused or recycled anywhere in the area. And I think we were going to take a quick pause here to see if we wanted to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Caroline. So I have a couple questions. Just number one, I know you said your population's 150,000. A lot of work being done here. What type of staffing do you have in the city?
Well, specifically focused on waste reduction and recycling, we have been at 1.5 FTE for a long time. When I was hired 5 years ago, we went up to 2 FTEs. And we just recently have gone up to 2.5 FTEs. But we have fairly, we are not a robustly staffed department.
So all the more appropriate or appreciative of your accomplishments. The other question that we have quite a bit on is your your goal, your waste reduction goal. So originally you had a 50% diversion goal by 2010. Certainly looked like you made that. And I'm assuming that your calculations continue to support increasing to zero waste.
That definitely remains our goal.
Okay. So let's continue with your presentation.
Okay. One of the areas the tool highlights is leading by example, and I should note with our previous question about the staffing that we have available, especially in the lead by example, there are many staff members at the city that have led these programs that are not, it's not just Susie and I who are leading the programs within the municipal organization. So we have a great green procurement policy within our purchasing department. We also participate in the recycled materials being used in road construction, as is highlighted in the tool. More and more, the City of Fort Collins actually engages in the, I believe it's called mill in place, where the asphalt is milled right there on site and reused for the new road construction. We do also have a fairly robust contract with the hauler that provides recycling and trash collection from the municipal organization buildings. That contract includes quarterly audits of the recyclables, and we're trying to work towards quarterly audits of the trash as well from select buildings. And we also included in our contract an ability for the city departments to decrease their trash service as needed, and we had tried to include an incentive for the contractor to identify when there were trash locations that looked like they could be decreased, That's been a little harder to operationalize, but we at least have lots of flexibility, and the contractor understands that the goal of the contract is to reduce trash and increase recycling at the city. The other item that I have listed here in bold, and I didn't put a number next to it, Karen, if there was a measure in the tool that led to something like this, I apologize, I might have missed it. But the city, my colleague had actually helped develop a really innovative program that I think is a wonderful example. It's called the Waste Innovation Fund. And we have sort of a unique scenario here at the city because we used to be owners of the landfill that is now operated by the county in our area. But as part of the agreement, when the city stopped its role in operations, the city municipal organization actually doesn't pay a tip fee to drop off recyclables or to drop off trash that is generated from municipal operations. So that means the the wet dirt that's dug up when a water main breaks, the material, there's just sort of a wide variety of industrial materials that are generated by the city operations. But whether or not you have that sort of unique scenario, the solution that was set up, because we realized that created very little incentive for the city departments to do anything other than landfill the material when there wasn't any financial impact to landfilling that. So we created what we called the Waste Innovation Fund, where the city effectively pays a tip fee to itself for that material. But again, you wouldn't have to have the sort of unique scenario that we have to set up something like this. You could sort of set up your own internal waste tax, if you will. But through this, the city tracks any of the material that the municipal operations take to the landfill, and those departments pay into a fund we call the Waste Innovation Fund. And then that's an internal grant fund that we use to decrease the amount of that material that is then sent to the landfill. It's been really successful. We've managed to decrease the amount of material the municipal organization is sending to the landfill by 50% over the last 5 years. And it has led to us being able to purchase equipment for, this year we'll likely be purchasing equipment to start a composting site for materials generated within our parks department. We have also purchased screeners for use to dry out and sort that wet dirt that we seem to dig up a lot of, so that we can then return that to beneficial use. So this Waste Innovation Fund has been a real boon to building up that capital that it takes to start these innovative programs that then can really significantly decrease the amount of material you're sending to the landfill. So just want to take a minute to highlight that one. Another one that I wasn't sure exactly where it fit in with the tool, but that we're also very proud of, the city's Parks Department took on an initiative last year to commit to having a recycling bin next to every trash bin throughout the community. They accomplished it all in 1 year. They just really committed to it, and they also at that time decreased the amount of trash bins spread throughout the parks by 20%. They're also working on it. It's in progress for our downtown area, but it's amazing the change that can happen when there's support and commitment in the organization. We also want to highlight that the city is active in backyard and neighborhood composting. The city provides education around composting and in-person classes. If you are interested in watching any videos about composting, we have really amazing soil scientists here at the agricultural focused Colorado State University, and videos of their compost presentations are on our website, and I highly recommend them. They're some of the best compost educational talks I've ever seen. We also have a project that we're working on this year where we're partnering with a local nonprofit to start distributed neighborhood compost programs, and that is primarily trying to find residents that are willing to be a host for a compost site, or community gardens where someone is willing to be in charge of a compost site, where neighborhood residents can connect with that person and bring compostables to them and have sort of neighborhood scale backyard composting taking place. On the infrastructure side, the city has operated a recycling drop-off center since 2002 that collects the traditional recyclables that are also collected curbside. And we're excited that this year we are opening up an expanded recycling center. So we'll have a portion of the recycling center that will still be open 7 days a week for people to drop off their traditional recyclables, but we're also going to have a separate section where we collect hard to recycle materials such as electronics, wood, yard trimmings, and some of the household hazardous waste materials. We're not taking the wide variety of, we're not taking the pesticides or any of the real toxic stuff, but we are going to be accepting antifreeze, batteries, oil, and paint, the materials that are often generated in high volume by residents. And we have the link to more information about that new recycling center. And the other piece of key infrastructure that is operated by the City of Fort Collins is our crushing facility. And this is really one of those hidden gems. I don't know if it's a hidden gem, but it is a really significant driver of diversion in Fort Collins. And it's, as I talked about before, it's not residential and commercial material. It may be material that is often not measured in communities, but the city's crushing facility recycles more material than was generated by all of the residents and businesses in all of Fort Collins in the year 2014. So they accept asphalt, concrete, dirt, and porcelain. So usually the porcelain comes in the form of toilets that people are ready to recycle. They crush those materials up, and they accept those materials both from the community and from municipal operations. And then the resulting ground-up material is used in municipal operations and is sold to the public. And just through the sale of the materials, this project is able to be revenue neutral. And it's just an amazing amount of material that goes through this site. And I don't know if we really focus a lot on the asphalt and the concrete and the dirt in our worlds, but it turns out a lot of it that gets disposed of one way or another. And so having this crushing facility has been a real important step in Fort Collins. And it's been around, I believe, since the early 90s, and was just started by our streets facility out of a recognition that they could reuse the materials that they needed. So this site wasn't developed from the waste reduction perspective. It was more of a practical perspective from the department that was using it, but it has turned out to be a really significant part of the landscape in Fort Collins. We do also have rules around construction and demolition recycling. Our building code requires that any construction site recycle wood, metal, cardboard, and aggregates. I would say this is one area where we have had a challenge implementing our regulations. We have found that the construction sites have had a hard time finding enough space for all the separated bins for the materials, as well as meeting the low contamination thresholds that the end destinations for the materials require. So this is one of those scenarios where we were able to include regulations that really are a great step towards zero waste, and we're still working on effective implementation of them on the ground. But we do also, as another tool that was highlighted, or another strategy highlighted in the EPA tool, we do provide a C&D resource sheet that is part of the permit application so that all of the contractors know where they can recycle the different materials. And we do also include information about a local nonprofit that does provide deconstruction services. That nonprofit is called the National Center for Craftsmanship. So we try to provide resources for the full spectrum of activities that a construction or demolition site might be interested in. And just to really drive home that point about the paying attention to the industrial side of the materials, again, we call them industrial, but the again, I put the list here of everything that in our categorization counts as industrial materials. But in Fort Collins, it turns out that by weight, 70% of the materials that are discarded are in that industrial category. So it's really important to us to track that, as well as the traditional commercial and residential MSW materials. And lastly, we have many private sector partners here in Fort Collins. So we do have one of those reuse closets that were highlighted as a strategy. We have something called the Teacher's Closet that provides supplies for teachers and students and accepts donations from the community. There is a private sector compost processor, actually two of them, one that's here in town that only accepts yard trimmings and wood waste, and then a facility 20 miles from town that accepts food scraps as well. We do have a lot of movement in anaerobic digestion in the area. The Heartland Biodigester just opened up in the small town of Kersey, which is 40 miles from Fort Collins, and it is the nation's, actually I think they might have, well, it's a very large anaerobic digester. They started off saying the largest in North America, but it's a really large wet anaerobic digester that will accept agricultural waste as well as food scraps, and that's a really exciting development. And the city's wastewater treatment facility is also considering expansion of its anaerobic digestion capacity and whether any materials from the community might make sense to be included in their anaerobic digestion systems. And then there are also private sector companies that are starting to provide the commercial food scraps collection. We expect that to increase now that the biodigester that accepts the food scraps is opening up. So that's another growing area in the private sector in Fort Collins. So that is sort of the overview of all the different facets that we've been able to make progress on, and here's my contact information.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. Karen, please forgive me. Caroline, for that presentation. Incredibly exciting work. We have a lot of questions on some of the operational activities and operational specifics, and I'm going to skip those, so apologies in advance to those of you on the phone. I want to stay a little bit more big picture on some of the programs and how you got there. So I have a couple of questions. Do you have some type of steering committee or advisory committee, or how do you interact with your stakeholders?
We do have an advisory committee that is in part of the official city structure called the Natural Resources Advisory Board, and their role is to advise City Council regarding these topics. There are not any nonprofits that focus specifically on waste reduction and recycling in Fort Collins. So, really the majority of our stakeholder involvement is one-on-one with my colleague and I, working very closely with the private sector service providers in the community and all the other aspects of our community.
Great, thank you so much. The other topic I have many questions on, Karen, is your waste reduction fund, or did I say that right? Your waste fund?
The Waste Innovation Fund.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Waste Innovation Fund. Can you talk a little bit more about how that gets funded, how that went over? It sounds incredibly creative.
Yeah, my colleague Susie Gordon was part of developing that program, and so if folks want to know the real details, I'll have to refer to her. But essentially, it was brought to everyone's attention that the city wasn't paying to landfill its own materials, and so my understanding is there was a group that was brainstorming what we should do about that. And the mechanism that it takes place through is that the landfill tracks the amount of material that the city that's delivered by city municipal trucks. So again, it's not all the materials from the community as a whole. It's not the material that's collected from our office buildings by the private sector. It's just the self-haul material, we call it. So the materials that are generated through city operations. The landfill tracks that just like they track all of their other customers, and every month they send a report of how much material was brought in by city vehicles, and it goes into our accounting department, and they essentially bill each of those departments, but the money, rather than being remitted to the landfill, it goes to a separate fund within the city. And then each of the departments that do that self-hauling, so our parks department and our streets department and the wastewater and stormwater, everybody, they all are part of what we call the Waste Innovation Team. So they all collectively get together, and there's an application process for projects that want to use that funding, and the group as a whole votes on which projects should be funded, and the goal is for those projects to decrease that material that's going to the landfill.
Great. So we have many more questions for Caroline, but I wanted to skip back to Karen. Karen, we had a little glitch in the tool rebooting when Karen did the information for the organics question. So I'd like to go back to that and Karen answer that again in a more complete way.
Yes, thank you, Chris. So yeah, we had not reset the tool, so I think I was surprised when I pulled up nothing for organics. So basically, we do have several things under the organics category. There's, let's see, there's about there's 12 entries here for organics that are ranked as having medium impact on upstream, and that would include things like mandatory composting, the backyard neighborhood composting, food pickup for donation, food gleaning. So there's a lot of things in here that relate to that. And I wanted to call out, there is one organics measure that is ranked as high, and that is landfill ban. So I think these are, it's kind of just trying to put in perspective that a landfill ban can go that much further in reducing upstream impact.
Great. Karen, while you're on the line, we also had some very basic questions on zero waste. And I know we haven't come up with a specific definition in EPA, but can you talk about how the tool deals with waste to energy, if at all? And then also anaerobic digestion also came up a lot, if that was included in the tool.
Well, definitely we have zero waste goal plan is included in the tool, and I think what I'm going to recommend folks do is go and look at some of these plans that communities have developed, and they really spell out why they're doing what they're doing. So definitely there's a lot of resources there to go and see their arguments and see how they match with your community's needs. So there's a lot of good resources there. And on the anaerobic digestion side, we do have a measure on anaerobic digestion as well. As folks may know, there is a large link between energy and water use, and a lot of the wastewater treatment plants out there are, they can save a lot of energy and a lot of money too by putting in anaerobic digestion as a co-digestion kind of process. There are also standalone anaerobic digestion options, but I'll just take you briefly to this part of the tool where we do cover anaerobic digestion. It's down here after composting, I believe. So there it is. So we try to call out some different ways to do it, and San Jose has a great facility, it's very advanced. Oakland has a great model for a wastewater treatment plant, anaerobic digestion, again co-digestion, and Santa Monica is collecting fog. So again, and we have some fabulous online resources here. We have a relatively new EPA report that came out showing how 6 water resource facilities are boosting their bottom line with anaerobic digestion. So definitely encourage you to look at those resources.
Great, and I can also push the Greater Lawrence Sanitary Sewer District here in Massachusetts also getting involved with anaerobic digestion of food waste or food scraps. So thank you for that. Karen, I also had another question. You mentioned another new EPA tool. Can you reintroduce that?
Yes, so this is a greenhouse gas calculator, and it was developed with the idea being, so we already have a WARM model, if those of you on the phone are familiar with the WARM model. And so that's basically telling you, let's say you have 10 tons of aluminum that you're, instead of landfilling, you're now going to recycle that 10 tons, and it'll spit out a number for you in terms of the greenhouse gas reductions. So what this tool tries to do is to place the WARM factors more directly in the context of community's baseline for how much is going to landfill, how much is already being recycling, how much is being composted. And so it's a spreadsheet, and so folks will be able to put in sort of a baseline year for data, what's already happening in the community. And then it gives you these options for what types of policies or programs you could implement, whether that's additional recycling programs or do a food scrap curbside pickup program, do a C&D ordinance, or look at recycling options for the commercial sector. and then to, it also gives some defaults and some rules of thumb to help you estimate, what you could get in terms of recycling or composting from those programs. And then you fill that in, and then it will enable you to estimate and kind of cross-compare over each year, as well as the 10-year cumulative, in looking in the future prospectively, what kind of greenhouse gas reduction you can get from the combination of programs, as well as a breakdown of what you could get from each program.
And Karen, can you just refresh my memory what the name of the school is?
Oh, I don't know that we've decided on a name yet. I'm calling it Policy and Program Impact Estimator right now. That might change. We have not yet posted it to the EPA website, but we're working on that, and I think it's going to be posted fairly soon, and we will include a link on this website to it.
Great, thank you very much. Karen, I also have a lot of questions around plastics recycling and reduction in plastic film, and I also wanted to correct my snafu earlier, connecting the RAP program that has to do with plastics recycling and plastic film recycling with the Fort Collins program. So thank you, Caroline, for correcting me on that. My bad, reading your slides too fast. But can you talk a little bit to plastics recycling in your town, Caroline, and what you are specifically doing in that arena?
Sure. I guess, plastics recycling is a big topic.
In the context of how you're increasing your recycling rates or your recovery rates.
Yeah, well, the primary, so in our area, the recycling center will collect all the 1 through 7 plastics. So there's a fair amount of opportunity for people, residents, everyone to recycle their bottles and tubs and trays. We are actually working with an electronics recycler in town to accepting the plastic film for recycling from small businesses in town. We've really identified that as a bit of a challenge. Some of the real large generators of the plastic film have been able to set up their own baling operations. But the small businesses that generate too much film to take to a grocery store or a big box store, but not enough for a baler, has been a topic we've been working on. And I think we've got a small business who will be willing to be a collector and a recycler for that material. So that's an exciting step that we have, that we're working on right now. Does that cover what you were looking for?
Yes, perfect. And one thing I also am fascinated by is just the private sector, public sector cooperation you seem to have in Fort Collins.
We have a lot of great partners. We work closely with a lot of different entities.
Yeah, absolutely. It really shines through in the diversity of your program. One other concept that didn't come up, I got a couple of questions on, is textiles. Caroline?
Mm-hmm. There are some textile drop-off programs in the community, both at our recycling drop-off center and some other places distributed throughout the community. So, I think there's the traditional network of thrift stores and reuse stores that will be happy to accept textiles, and then we also have some textile drop-offs in the community.
Great.
We don't have that information as closely tracked.
Great, thank you so much. Karen, I see you flipping through the tool. Is there something you want to show or say?
Oh, no, I was just tracking as Caroline was talking about plastics, and then I just pulled up an example on textile drop-off from Bethlehem, New York. So I just wanted to let people know there's a lot in here. It's sifting through it.
And one other question, I've got quite a few questions on our we talked about landfill bans and ordinances. Is there a specific, or is that type of thing covered in the tool, Karen?
Yes, definitely. Landfill bans are definitely covered in the tool for both the recyclable materials and the compostables.
Great.
And, if I may, can I add something about the landfill bans?
Please do, Caroline.
What we've found with our cardboard ban and the electronics ban is just sort of a different category, but especially with the cardboard ban, we found it to be an effective tool, but we also found it to be sort of challenging for implementation when it wasn't paired with that service being required in the community. So, you know, for say for businesses specifically, where we have about 50% of the businesses currently recycling in Fort Collins, adopting the cardboard ban, there was certainly a bump in the amount of businesses that subscribed to recycling, but it was it's hard to have a ban itself be the primary motivator for getting locations to start up new recycling service. You know, it requires a sort of big steps of making sure they hear about it and understand how to implement it and start their service. And so as we've moved forward, we have suggested that we're not recommending additional landfill bans for materials in Fort Collins unless they come along with or after the service for collecting those materials being provided automatically in the community.
And remind me, is your landfill ban for cardboard specific just to Fort Collins?
Yes.
So it's not a state ban?
No, it's just for, we're actually, I think, the only community in a pretty wide multi-state area that has a cardboard ban.
Yeah, very different landscape out here in Massachusetts. Can I also just ask some of the outreach materials? Clearly you have an aggressive program. Do you do much on social media? A lot of questions on how you get this message out to the community.
Well, it's a constant source of effort, I think, in all of our communities. We do use social media as part of our outreach strategies. We actually just kicked off a program this spring that we're calling Recycle Happy because we were trying to think up a more engaging and fun way to talk about recycling guidelines. Because, you know, it's still constantly a challenge to make sure. Here in Fort Collins and in northern Colorado, we have a fairly low contamination rate. Depending on the month, it goes between 6 and 10%, but it's very important that we keep it as low as possible. So we just started off a campaign, again, that we called Recycle Happy, and it's focused primarily around social media, where we just highlighted some of the most commonly confused contaminants that end up in the recycling stream, but also some of the highest value recyclables to highlight, you know, trying on both sides to keep contaminants out of the recycling stream, but keep the high value recyclables out of the landfill stream as well. So we've created that as a whole series of images with little information pieces, and we're actually going to be having a Recycle Happy lunch hour in a couple weeks, where we'll be having a, you know, I'm not as much of an expert in the social media, but I think we're planning on a Periscope video, I had heard, which I will figure out between now and then. And we will also be doing some live tweeting and live Facebooking of answering people's questions. So we do try to engage on all fronts with the community.
Great. So we're coming to a close. Karen, do you have any final words you'd like to share with the audience?
I would just thank you everyone for your attention, and I encourage you to use this tool and get as much as you can out of the content of it. And I do welcome suggestions for, like I said, success stories or other resources, so please send these my way.
Great. And Caroline?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for inviting Fort Collins to participate in this webinar. And you know, the primary message that I would want to share with communities is that, you know, there's nothing amazingly unique about Fort Collins that has allowed us to make progress in this open market system that is pretty common here in the Rocky Mountain West. As my colleague has used as her mantra throughout her career at the city in waste reduction and recycling, mostly we're just always working to identify what is the next best thing we can focus on, and just, you know, step by step is how you make any progress.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Karen and Caroline, for your work on moving towards zero waste. Thank you all for joining this month. You are why we're here and who the program is designed for. Please complete our evaluation, and which specifically asks if you like the opportunity to further interact with EPA on this tool. Karen is really looking for feedback and for input, and very much interested in your thoughts and concerns and comments. So please make sure you complete our evaluation and give us the feedback on how we can meet your needs. Any other topics you'd like to hear us covered, please include that. And thank you so much. This concludes today's session. Bye-bye.